Hi, everyone. It's Mary Ellen Slayter, and I'm the CEO of RepCap. We're a content marketing agency that works primarily in financial services, HR tech, and insurance. And I am super excited to host this panel today with some of my favorite people, all of whom I'm going to just very quickly introduce. We are going to be talking about AI, and we're going to talk about AI not in the way that maybe some of you have been talking about it in the past. We're not going to explain AI. We're not going to explain how it works. We're going to talk about how it's actually impacting the way we work. So just to get started, I've got Lauren Campbell here. She's the head of marketing at Starmind, which is they would pain me to say this, but it's like essentially a knowledge management platform, but way better. Like it uses AI to match people with experts within their organization. So not just the facts and the information, but actually the people. When people talk about putting the human in the loop, that's what they're doing. I've got John Schneider here. He's the CMO at Betterworks, which is an intelligent performance management system. Also looking at ways to incorporate AI ethically and fairly into HR processes. And I got Mike Carden, who worked at Joyous now, but some of you may know him from some prior companies, where he's worked in a lot of HR tech stuff. You've been meddling in a lot of things for a while, but you and I have also been talking about AI and how to use AI in a smart way for a long time, actually. And then Mike Zach with Acterys, which is built an interesting tool to pull together data from a lot of disparate sources. And one of the many things it can do once you pull all those things into different sources, it can use AI and machine learning to help you actually get insights out of that data. And I brought this group together. Basically, these are all people that I've been having interesting side conversations with, about these topics for a while now. Really, honestly, predating the genAI revolution. Lauren, in your case, how long has Starmind been around? It's not a new company.
No, we're in our 13th year. So we've been developing our AI tool for quite some time. And I think the market certainly came up to speed with us, last year when ChatGPT really was launched.
Yeah, so I just want to say that was kind of my impetus for this. And as we jump in and get started here, I'm going to actually start off with might seem like a silly question, but I want to go all the way back to 2022, when OpenAI dropped ChatGPT on us for experimentation. And I'm going to start with you, John. What did you type into ChatGPT?
I took a long pause because I thought about it, and I was like, if I don't ask a good question, somebody's going to ask me this exact question later on. I'm going to be embarrassed. So I actually, I had to go back into all my history and think about it. And so the first question I actually asked it was, how does Tiger Woods empower himself with a winning mindset?
And what did it say? Did you get a good answer?
It did, actually. It said he visualizes success. He focuses on process. He gives himself positive self-talk. He aspires to be resilient, and he prepares incessantly to be in a winning mindset. And I asked that question specifically because I figured there'd be a lot written on it, but perhaps it wasn't as summarized as the way I was asking it. And I wanted to see how close this AI thing that I hadn't tried could actually answer the exact question I was asking.
And what did you think? Were you satisfied with that answer, or what was your...
It was very well done. Yeah. Bulleted and described, and it was exactly on the mark.
What was yours, Carden?
Oh, it's funny. We've been using I guess GPT API for a while, within the organization, and so there'd been some kind of talk around how it was useful, but our own algorithms were better. And so I kind of I saw all this kind of wave going, and I was literally coming up to Christmas, I think it was, and I was like, oh, I'll just have a go myself with some of our stuff. And so I literally, we had a model which identified action in people's conversations. So when someone's talking about doing something rather than just complaining in employee feedback, maybe. And so I went and took a little sample set of conversations and said, hey, in these conversations, can you identify the action and then summarize what people are talking about into themes? Some kind of pretty loose prompt like that. And if you want to know about the outcome, it was hey, seems to be outperforming our own algorithm, which I've been told, by the data science team, is the gold standard, and we're kind of keep improving on that. So it actually, it rocked my world to an extent, because suddenly I was sitting there going hey, it's our ego getting in the way of this. Is there this thing where suddenly actually there's a third-party system that's outperforming our own models? And yeah, are we taking that seriously? Yeah. So, by the way, my follow-up question was, then can you translate this into French? And I only did that because I've been talking to our data science team about how that functionality was, years away. So it's like, and then I gave it to my my co-founder who's French, and he was like, I think we need to do something about this.
And then they were all fired. No, like no. No, I mean, it was pretty game changing. Mike, Zach, what did you type in?
Mine, I was a little bit more selfish. Mine was a question about, based on historical patterns, which stock should I purchase next in the tech space? Now I got a terrible answer because it didn't have a lot of knowledge at that time when I first did it. It gave me that prompt where it's like, oh, I don't have data past 2022 or something like that. So I didn't get much out of it, but it was worth it. I use it on a daily basis.
Buy Apple, right? I think buy Apple is.
Yeah, exactly. Buy Apple or Microsoft.
Oh, what about you, Lauren? What'd you type in?
Well, I actually went back just to go check and see what I did, and again, it was for selfish reasons. I typed in Egyptian hotels that are family friendly because I was looking for New Year's Eve locations, family, and again, that's where that the hallucination is potential with this tool, because it had no knowledge before 2021. So there were actually hotels that existed that were not on the list, and if I type that in today, it's only up to date till April of 2023, which would not include any of the, things that are happening within that area. So I would still recommend it's a good place with those hotels, not mentioning anything that's happening currently. So I think it's great. I've used it for other things, like just, rewrite this for a LinkedIn post, and it does a great job, but I think you have to be really careful with this tool because there's like 30% where it can be really not so sure,
Mm-hmm. I asked it who was the best Star Trek captain, which it obviously couldn't answer. And then I asked it to write me an essay explaining why Janeway was the best Star Trek captain, and I had no trouble writing that. So I kept pushing it to figure out when it would stop claiming it could tell me something. But the essay it wrote about Janeway was pretty good, although it also contained things that weren't true. So it was like, you made that up. You made that. So I do think it's been interesting now. Now over the last year, since that happened, there's been other tools, sort of built for purpose tools, our own tools that we're using for this. I'm going to go back to you here for a second, John. But what are some of the things that you use? I mean, you're marketing, you're running a growing team. Y'all make a lot of content. You have to make a lot of decisions. There's a lot of stuff. What are some of the things that you've used it for? And what have you learned? What worked, what didn't?
Yeah, and my CEO being very excited about generative AI, he immediately wanted us to embrace it. And I think marketing tended to be one of the areas where everybody went oh yeah, right there. There's the use case, writing. and so I felt a little bit of pressure to kind of get going fast. The things I've told my team in particular were to pick a tool and go. I think that was sage advice because the reality is there's over 100 AI apps being brought to market, unique companies being brought to market every month right now. And that means there's going to be a lot of junk. There's also going to be a lot of consolidation, and you're never going to be the master of all tools. So I think that was the thing that I wanted to zero in on first. And then I thought as a CMO, having clear guidance on goals was important because if I didn't put some structure around an experiment, I'd have no result. And so the area was content. And so that hit the content team. And the question was, in particular, let's pursue some blogs that are SEO friendly and that would actually rank. Can we produce a few blogs and actually get them up there? In terms of tools, as you know, I also took strong advice from one of my agencies, RepCap, who was actually ahead of me with us. As I was mentioning the tools, my CEO gave everybody in the company ChatGPT Plus, and so that was the first place to go. And I decided to take it upon myself that I needed to lead the way, and so I went and trained my own blog writing assistant on what our standards were, style guides and all of those things. In parallel, my content team is working very closely with your team on Writer AI, which we believe is where we'll actually consolidate around. I think the last thing I would say, on that part, the thing about it also is the hard part, I think, especially with writing, is you really don't know how good one tool is against the other unless you're willing to put all the extra repetitions in and like go from Chat GPT to somewhere else like Bard or Writer AI. And so I'm constantly trying to budget time to actually understand if the tool is the right tool. And it's actually pretty hard. I mean, you have to pay really close attention to the differences between the two, and you have to give them a fair shot. So again, pick a tool and go. Don't try to be a master of every tool and try to invest. And the other part, of course, is responsibility was a big deal, right? It's okay to put public domain content in it and ask questions, but it's not okay to put customer data in it. And my CEO, brought out, standards and rules and ethics applications to the tools right away, which was very helpful to govern what we were doing.
You should tell them more about the thing you built. It has a name. You're making this sound so dry. You named it.
I know. Okay. I don't know.
Mascot.
I started it on over the holiday break, and as soon as I started feeding it content, so I was giving it style guides and all that stuff. I was like, I just thought it was the Betterworks blog writer beast. I thought it was a beast because it eats anything I give it, and then it puts it back out if it doesn't like it, because it didn't ingest a certain formats of files very well. so I don't know. I didn't actually go through a naming exercise. It just kind of came to me.
No, it's just the beast. It's just the beast now, and it has a mascot though. It's the only one I've seen of an in-house one that has a cute little mascot. You want to tell everybody
our most popular dog? Yes,
right.
Cosmo.
Little Cosmo over there. What about you, Mike? What are Cardin? I guess I should kind of use last names on this one. Cardin, what are some of the things that you did? I mean, it sounds a little weird because I realize you kind of do this for all the time, but like, what are some things you used it for? And like, what are some things that you learned that surprised you?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we were just, maybe to John's point, just kind of super flexible. Like we had a mandate which was, hey, this is going to impact parts of the business, and we should be working out quickly, what parts of the business will get impacted. So we kind of had this whole data science R&D team working on product, right? And they've got their own kind of, their own experiments going on, and they're measuring precision against their own models and doing data sciencey kind of things. But it was more like, what can we throw to the rest of the organization? And I think that it was probably most impactful in two spaces quickly. The first was in what I just kind of describe as marketing prototyping, like sort of quickly getting to a kind of proof of concept in marketing. And so a good example of that is, we would put together a website mock-up, say, and we'd use, stock imagery with 1, 2, 3 royalty free written all over it or something. We quickly moved to using Midjourney to create like the scenes we wanted. And they were like, that's how we'll mock stuff up. Interestingly enough, quite quickly we went to saying, hey, some of these mock-ups are actually better than the stuff which we're going to put together in a studio. So why don't we just, use this picture of this? I don't know. We want a hardworking looking nurse. We want them to be, middle-aged at least. All sorts of things which you can't actually get. Certainly at that point, like a year ago, you couldn't get the content sites to do. So we started doing that stuff. I'd say the other big area though was just an engineering efficiency, right? Of going, okay, let's use Copilot, attached to our tools to attach to GitHub to make, to write code, so to sort of do the work of a junior coder. And we've seen examples where that's doing 10%, 30%, even 70% of people's work, right? Of actually putting together the first initial pass at writing some code. And and I think that then from there it was like, you get that going on. You get people seeing like, hey, there's people using this in just completely disparate things. I've got someone using it for stock imagery, and I've got someone using it to help speed up their JavaScript development. Like suddenly everyone's going like, oh, hang on, where does this impact me?
Mm-hmm. So actually, you said something that I want to kind of follow up and explore here with this group a little bit. You mentioned doing the work of junior coders. And I would say in my own business, it has basically replaced the work of junior writers. So if we don't make any more junior writers and junior coders, because AI does that work for us senior people, where do we get mid-level and senior writers and coders from?
Well, I guess the optimistic view is that like, people become mid-level writers much quicker because, you've got, AI doing some of that, more junior work. I mean, the thing which we definitely did know is that it doesn't actually replace, because of its ability to hallucinate, like Lauren said, that's not uncommon, in fact, right? It can, most of these things can kind of go on a riff sometimes. So you do actually need to have some understanding of it. But you are identifying one of the big challenges of the emerging economy, aren't you? Is that you removed a bunch of junior roles, right?
Yeah, I mean that's how it disrupted my business. It eliminated the concept of a junior writer. In fact, it's damn near eliminated the concept of a writer. Like we actually don't have writers at RepCap anymore. We only have content marketing managers who are expected to use the time saved in writing, like in that rote kind of writing, to do more interface with the clients, to do more creativity, more analysis. It's like the hours haven't shrunk, but what they spend their time on is very different. It is radically different from a year ago.
I thought you were going to say that you'd replace junior writer. Yeah, you'd replace that with prompt engineers.
Yes, right away. No, but I think it's interesting. Like, where do we, that I think that's going to be very disruptive, like beyond even our individual companies. Like I'm already seeing that. I see that in my company on the micro level. But I'm really worried about it on the macro level. Somebody who's been writing about the future of work for 20 years, this is unnerving. Like this should be unnerving. You should be thinking about what skills that you matter more.
I reckon that what everyone does though, everyone goes and says, "Oh, this is not going to impact me, so I'll find some group it will impact." So a little while ago, all of us kind of like, office workers were sitting there like, "Oh, self-driving trucks, it's going to put the truck drivers out of business." Like that was, it's not going to affect me, is it? Now it's like, oh well, I'm kind of into the mid stage of my career. It's not going to affect me. It's just going to affect the juniors. That's kind of nonsense. If you actually look at where it's made an impact in a lot of businesses, certainly if you look at it in a serious engineering fashion. Like the teams which got smaller this year were data science teams full of senior data science engineers because suddenly they weren't required as much, right? And so I think this bit where we narrow our view a little bit towards, it's impacting the juniors. I do understand why we do that, but possibly it's a little bit because we're ignoring the fact that it's impacting all of us.
It is absolutely. Lauren, what are some of the things that you tried it with, like in your role?
Well, we at Starmind have quite a small marketing team, which is why we work with RepCap and take a lot of your lead. And last year was a big transformation year for us, where we really started focusing on just very specific core solutions. So we weren't trying to be everything for everyone. We decided, hey, here's how we need to narrow and focus. And now we're even going even further and switching to more ABM type focus, which, has its pros and cons as they all do. And so I think, inheriting the practices of AI using tools, Canva's a good example for us, being able to be really agile and quick and personalizing things. So getting to the point where, we could quickly turn around, design work, which would normally take, an outside freelance, for a company like us, time, right? So now we're doing this in-house. People who wouldn't necessarily have a design degree are now creating banners and one pager, all sorts of things that, you would need a degree for just a few years ago. So it's really impacted us. It's even allowed us to focus, as you said, on different things, right? And it hasn't removed our need for a company like RepCap. We still need them, but it's shifted in what we are asking. Now we're asking for more things that are strictly human related, right? The strategy, the mind, the thinking behind it, where we're kind of removing all the time it takes to do the smaller things, which is the junior stuff you're talking about, those things that can happen a lot quicker. But we're not abandoning, the real people behind what it is we're creating. So we do enjoy that Canva though. I have to say.
To add to that, I think my CEO said it really well, something to the effect of, generative AI is not going to replace people. It's going to replace people that don't know how to use generative AI.
Right.
What you're all talking about here in comments about it, that's basically what you're saying. Is the people that can use these tools are the people that are going to be successful, and you have to dive in and try.
One of the interesting things, actually, I think about all of you is that you're all at startups, right? And you're actually all at startups that primarily sell into large companies, like really big companies. You're all primarily selling to the enterprise. And I think part of why you're listening to these use cases, like you're already resource constrained. Like you're already like the expectations, you have like an infinitely long list of things that you probably feel like you should be doing. And what I'm hearing is like that this allows you to get through some of that stuff so you can get to this other stuff that otherwise you wouldn't be able to, right? I mean, that's kind of what I'm kind of hearing in that too, because there's an infinite amount of work. Like somebody's asked me before if I felt threatened by AI, genAI as an agency. And I'm like, if I thought the only way I could add value was by typing a lot of words, then yes, I would be very threatened. And in reality, for me and for my clients, there's just an infinite amount of shit that needs to get done. And like, we can just move on to new shit like, that we should be moving ahead. And like, the faster you can accept that and the faster you can like get to that other more strategic stuff. And the other kind of framework that I like to use for it is I ask myself, I'm looking at this use case, like, does this get me closer to my customer or does it put me further away? And what I mean by that, and this is something I know, John, you and I've been chatting about, is like, what are the ways that we can use this to get customer data and to personalize things and like really kind of bring it in to my human brain in available hours. We never could have done this before, but AI gives me a shot at it. That is closer to your customer. Sitting down and typing into ChatGPT, write me a 750 word blog post targeting this keyword in the most generic possible way is distance from my customer. Right. I don't want distance from my customer. Like we're going to get like this, you know, like, so if AI can help you get closer, then that's good. And further, Mike, Zach, what are some things that you've been doing? I mean, you got like a cool little Swiss Army knife of a tool that takes all the data and connects it all and turns it into Power BI. And then you can throw machine learning on that. But like, I feel like you're just infinitely messing with stuff. What did you try this year?
Yeah, well, quick comment, just to John's point. I think of generative AI as like a second or third monitor. Like going back to one monitor would drive me nuts, and I would never be as productive as having 2, 3, or 4 monitors. So I think that's what people need to really focus on, is that this is an add-on type of solution that's going to enhance your productivity going forward and allow you to compete in a competitive world. Now, back to your question, Mary Ellen, we've used it a lot in a lot of different ways. I think one of the problems that AI is going to bring to the table, as much as pointed SaaS solutions has brought to the table, is the fact that a lot of these solutions will work in silos, and it won't give you that more strategic oversight of what's happening within the business. And if you have a marketing system which has AI, a CRM that has AI, an accounting system that has AI, you're not going to get that holistic AI experience. And that's really what we try to pitch to our clients and internally is, let's bring all the data together and use one common AI to train that across the entire organization, so you know exactly where you're going and be able to prepare for the future. That's one of the biggest things that we're kind of striving for, is one, bring all the data together. Because a lot of people that come to us, they say, well, we want to start using AI. And then we ask them where their data is and they say Excel. So it's like, you really can't have best of both worlds there. So it's really kind of bringing the data together, making sense of it, because you have different languages that are being spoken in the different departments, and then throwing generative AI on top of that to really help with productivity and move the business forward. And then add that human element to it, which will never go away, and keep that emotional impact to the customer.
Mm-hmm. I actually really love the second, third monitor. Like, I've never heard you say that before, and I am stealing it. Like, I am stealing that because it's true. You just got to keep the tools open, and you're like, I find that, one of the ways I use it is like, if I'm writing something and I'm feeling stuck and I need another angle, like it's just there, and I'm like, give me 10 more ideas for this. And it doesn't mean those are like, I'm just going to go publish that. But sometimes that's all it takes to like shake my brain loose, like, from what was going on in there before. So I do kind of, it's like, it's a constantly open tab. There's multiple. That's actually very good.
That piece of actually setting yourself up in such a way that you are encouraged to experiment yourself is the important thing to me, right? So because it's kind of just there, I'll give you an example. I'm doing checking the commission plan, new commission plans for the sales reps. I get given the commission plan that's been put together. Like, often my first port of, in this particular instance, my first port of call is I'll put it into GPT and say, compare this commission plan to a best practice commission plan. And so then it's given me, the 3 points of like, well, actually your percentage is different than normal commission plans or something, and a few other things, right? And so it's just like literally just does a piece of work that I otherwise would have gone to the internet and kind of, looked for a few blog posts and done that sort of stuff. It's just done it instantly like that. And that's how you kind of, to the second, third monitor example, it's like, it's actually when you put it in there to just do stuff which you wouldn't otherwise plan on doing, that you often get the most interesting results.
Yeah. I'm interested. So I'm thinking about that, right? Actually, and I'm going to stay with you on this one, Carden, because like, again, you've been playing with this for a while, and like Joyous was built with this inside, much like Starmind from the beginning. AI is critical to how your tool actually works, the software that you're selling. So like, as you're taking this to market, what are some of the things that you've learned from working with your customers as you've rolled these out? Like, where have they had struggles? Like, what has been easier than you expected?
Oh, I think that it's interesting, right? Like if you went back a few years, particularly in the HR tech space, or any kind of new tech, there was this trend of attaching AI to things, and no one really understanding what it meaning. And so then there was a sort of move suddenly against it, which was like, well, instead of talking about our AI, let's just talk about the positive impact it will have to you as a customer. So we'll focus on the outcomes rather than focus on the technology. To sort of, I don't know, if you're a student of April Dunford, who's the guru on positioning, she's always like, there's always a benefit in attaching yourself to a trend. And suddenly there's this benefit to attaching yourself to a trend. So we're frontline feedback for operational improvement. Suddenly we're AI powered frontline feedback for operational improvement. And the reason for that is because within the large enterprises we sell into, there's a mandate that's come down, much the way that John's CEO passed a mandate to his team. There's or her team. There's a mandate there going on saying, hey, we need to embrace AI, but they don't really quite know how to do it. They don't really have a frame. And so I think that Lauren was using the example of Canva. There's actually this thing where the tool actually takes the sort of heavy lifting of how to interface with the AI out of the world for you, and says, hey, these are the outcomes you want. And they've built the guardrails and they've done all the work and so on. I think that's a part, it's a big part of what makes Joyous appealing to the enterprise, is that they know they need to use AI. They know that it's actually got some challenges, and we've thought about lots of that stuff for them already, right?
Yeah. I mean, Lauren, why don't we go to you for a second here? Because you had an interest, again, 11-year-old company that had AI from the beginning. Explaining it was the hardest thing in the world. Like when it works like it's supposed to, it looks like magic. But you have a very specific type of client that has some very specific concerns. And talk about how people use Starmind and like what y'all learned from that.
Yeah, so we are really focused on the tacit knowledge that employees have. So the things that are not documented. In fact, they're undocumentable. If an employee of 20 years were to try to write down everything they knew before they left their job, it'd be impossible, right? So it's really trying to tap into the stuff that you just you haven't written. And so it allows for questions to be asked anonymously and then be tagged by the interactions which are happening in other applications, and you're served up someone who would be an expert at that particular topic. So the algorithm figures out who those people are, it learns, unlearns, and figures out who is the best to answer that. And we are talking about people who are at pharmaceutical companies, large pharmaceutical, who are working on clinical trials. So something that's happening over the course of 10 years. You've got 5 phases of a drug to market. And every day you're not the first to go to market, you're literally losing millions of dollars. So, and it may be you're asking a question about a molecular ingredient to someone who has already worked on that in another country that happened 3 years ago. So trying to find that person in something that was documented might be more difficult than if you had something that would basically be that monitor, or you could ask your community, which is much larger than what you probably know it is, knowing all the people in your 10,000 plus company. So that's where we've really had to figure out, all these other players, not competitors, but just players in this area. You've got Copilot, you've got all Viva, you've got all these great tools, but what we're trying to tap into is just the people, the experts that can verify the answers that are happening within this platform. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
You say you can't just type that into ChatGPT. You can't just ask it like, hey, my clinical trial is stuck. How do I get it unstuck? That's not a thing.
Well, I mean, as much as we'd like,
are people trying that anyway?
Scientists are really, they're so protective. I mean, it's really hard to even get people to talk about this in a closed environment. So, we're talking to people, even CPG companies that, they're trying to bring new items to market through their supply chain. I mean, it's really, information that's sensitive. So, no, they're not necessarily just plugging this stuff into ChatGPT. It would hurt their competitive edge.
The problem is, though, that GPT is infrequently coming back with an answer that says like, "Oh, sorry, that's beyond my ability." Yeah, to your example, Lauren.
Good. I mean, hopefully, I'd rather be honest.
And it's actually built to answer it differently each time, right? You could actually submit the same question a few times over a course of time, and it's built to give you something fresher. So you're right. How do you know if it's at its limit, right?
I think that's when you have to come back and make sure people, I think about how we've rolled these tools out and they look like magic, and like making sure people understand how it works, right? That it's a predictive model. Like, it's not a fact checker. And like, there was one moment this year where somebody I was working with, and they said, well, are you sure this is right? I took this and I fact checked it in ChatGPT. And I was like, you did what? Like, like, it's like ChatGPT or any of these models, they are not fact checkers. Like, they're not reliable for that. Like, it is a predictive model of like, what is the most likely word to come after this word, like based on what you're giving me, or like if you're talking about creating content. And that's a very dangerous thing. Like, if you think that it can fact check, like, there are other models that can do that. There are other ways you can use AI for things like that, but that doesn't work that way. And so I had to kind of stop and go, okay, girl, we're not going to do that anymore. And like, here's where the actual sources are for the things that we're citing. Like that made me so nervous. John, actually, what have y'all run into? Like, because I mean, I think you've had kind of a pretty deliberate approach and pretty thoughtful about this. Like, what are some of the issues that y'all have encountered? And like, what are customers worried about? What are they excited about?
Yeah, I mean, so we have developed a solution that replaces the traditional annual performance review. So we provide goals, feedback, a platform for goals, feedback, recognition, and conversations with employees and managers at a more continuous level, throughout the year. Our users use the product every single week, and you can imagine how different that is in the traditional human resources systems, where you go in once a year and you're like, oh my gosh, the goals in here, and I didn't even do them. Like, that was, I don't remember why they're in here, and everybody hates the process. So as we know that, that there's probably a little controversy about the idea that generative AI would write your performance review. Well, we did a survey at the end of last calendar year, and we received back from the workforce that 54% of employees were already citing they were using ChatGPT for their performance review conversations with their manager. So whether or not HR wants to, go with it or not, it's going to happen, and it will get to 100% of people will use it for those kinds of activities, because everybody hates that process, and they're going to ask ChatGPT to give them the strongest answer to position themselves in their performance review. Managers hate it too. So we have seen that, within the customer base, obviously there can be some caution, but we see like pretty strong differences. One of the largest investment banks in the world is completely bullish on it and is embracing it entirely in all its potential. Whereas we had another one say, there's no way I'm letting an AI tool write performance reviews. I think that's going to melt away, because these tools are going to be embedded in every product, and they're just going to be available. The way that we've approached it from a product perspective, because now we're already introducing all these assistants. You can write your goals, you can write your, get feedback suggestions. The way that we're approaching it is, first of all, principally, you could turn it on or off. So from an administration perspective, there's a decision to hand it out to the employees. We make it available to our customers, and it's not forced fit into their lives. So I think that's an important characteristic of what we do. We also try to make sure that everything has transparency built into it. I think, Mary Ellen, you were talking a little bit about the traceability around the facts that are generated. So can you trace back why it's suggesting, the write-up it gave you, things like that. There's also transparency just in our data and security model. We serve large enterprise, so we have to be very clear as to how data is handled, and that it is protected from other, given it's people-oriented data within the workforce. So we've had to work on those various things, but I think the reluctance is going to decrease tremendously over time. The idea that people worry about something like biased performance reviews from generative AI is almost laughable when you think about how biased performance reviews are when humans do them. The idea that taking the entire body of work of what an employee did and summarizing it with AI would be more biased than what a manager has to remember. We know managers more and more have larger staffs to support. They more and more have to be individual contributors and managers. They're completely overwhelmed. The chances that they know everything that their employee did all year long is not even possible in most modern enterprises. So the notion that we can give that manager a head start with really good ideas as to what the employee accomplished and where there may be some roadblocks or challenges is the path in the future. There's no question.
So Carden, I'm going to say this as somebody who once built a pretty great little performance management tool. Do you feel a little jealous that like you don't get to put AI in it? That like you, how does this feel to you? Do you feel like they're all getting to like? I mean, to be clear, you built a great tool and it's still in use and I'm sure in its version. But anyway, how do you feel when you hear this?
Look, I mean, I think the thing you've got to be careful of though is that like if you kind of lower the cost of producing bullshit, then you'll produce a lot more bullshit, right? And that's the constant HR challenge, right? Not wanting to be kind of using HR as a punching bag, but it's a constant challenge. So if you, and I'm not throwing this into John's court at all. I just more mean that if you're sitting there going, I've got some kind of HR process which is really heavy on filling forms, and now I can fill in a truck ton more forms because I've got a machine to fill in forms for me, you're actually making the world worse, not better, right? And so I think that is if you're using, if the direction that you're using AI in is to simplify things, then that's great. If the direction you're using it in is to like just do more form filling on behalf of overworked managers, then like you're heading in the wrong direction, aren't you? And so I think that like that's the thing to me. It's like, there's a very early quote, and I forget who said it now, but they said, the real challenge with generative AI is it has pushed the cost of producing bullshit down to zero.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's a genuine challenge, because the more bullshit your organization generates, the harder you make it for people to actually do their jobs.
This is very true. This is very, very true. All right, Mike, Zach, I'm going to go to you. Like, what are some of the things that y'all learned this year from helping people?
First off, I love this conversation because I agree with everything, and it's. ChatGPT it's a great tool, right? And we've kind of already articulated that. But what it also did on the vendor side is it made it seem like it was the easy button. Anyone can go to this, it queries the entire internet, and now all of a sudden everyone wants this in their day-to-day life, and that's just not reality. And it goes back to where what we're doing on our side is we're creating specific language models that are geared towards a certain vertical or a certain subject or a certain industry. Because then they can actually adapt to it and you can train it based on the subject matter experts in that field. And there's a very large gap between people that use generative AI and people that build the generative AI models. Like there's the huge gap that we need to fill to make it more seamless and make it to a point where it actually is an easy button. And I think that's where it's going to come down is trusting the source and having a single place where people can actually contribute knowledge to that language model. And it's beneficial for the broader group. I almost think of it like the media too. You can turn on the media, Fox, CNN, whatever channel you want, and you're going to get their perspective, not the true perspective on what's happening in the world. And I fear that people are going to abuse this because any good technology that comes out, there's always someone that's going to abuse it in the wrong way. I fear that's where we're going to go is if we're going to have all these different avenues of reaching generative AI, but it's not going to be quality. It's going to be more quantity based.
One thing, actually, I want to pick up on something you said. You're about building them to be specific to these industries and these applications. And I think that is something that I want to explore here with y'all just a little bit, because I think we have, there are these Chat GPT, and then we all have like options here where we can just get somebody else's thing. And then Starmind is like, it's got its own LLM behind it, right? And then, so how do you know when you need to build something yourself versus use one of these tools, like, or even the in between, like what John did, where he took the other thing, but he still tailored it like heavily. Like, how are y'all thinking through that decision? And I'll start with you, Mike, Zach, actually. How do you know when you need to build your own thing versus? I'm going
to go back to Mike Carden's example. It's the bullshit. Yeah. How much bullshit are you getting to a point where it's like, okay, this is not working. This is not valuable to the end user. And it's not geared to the right person either. They're getting generic answers. And then we use ChatGPT all the time as a group here. And there's a lot of answers that we get where we're just like, that just doesn't work for me because it doesn't fit my business. And you have to get to a point where you actually understand your business to be able to take that power that AI is bringing to the table and work it all in. I think it was the comp example earlier. You may not have a sales team that's compensated in the same way as another business because you're selling something completely different. And that's really what's determining from our standpoint is everyone looks at information differently, but they say they want the same results and they want the same productivity. But how do you get to that point of being able to tailor that content that you're distributing to them in an AI world that they're going to actually use?
Mm-hmm. John, how do you decide?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously saw that I went ahead and went down the path of just training ChatGPT, and that was a choice. At this stage, I don't feel comfortable with the idea that I'm going to go try to create some verticalized app that's unique or tailored at this point. I want to see what the industry does. To the point of value, yeah, I mean, value is still pretty sparse. Honestly, I think that my content team's reporting maybe a 30% efficiency boost.
Mm-hmm.
That gets back to the point of like it doesn't eliminate people. Honestly, for me, what I've seen is that even with a trained ChatGPT, like I'm using my blog writer beast, what I find is the content planning process is as significant, or if not more, because to get to the prompts you need and the information you want to feed it, it's not going to be original if it doesn't know what's in your mind. Mm-hmm. You have to draw all the connections between what's happening in your industry to what your company's trying to convey, to what your insights are in your customer. And it really is not going to do that out of the box or even in a trained model. So I feel like the world is going to shift more to both the pre-production side, where you're going to spend more time investing in how to make something really well written and all that. And then there's going to be the editorial side where you clean it up at the end, because it's, again, not going to write exactly the way you want. I think it's going to squish down the middle part, that blank page, like getting out the first outline and mm-hmm. things like that. But I would not go into this thing thinking that it's going to be like a magic wand and you're going to have, increases of, hundreds of % in capacity within your team by using it.
Mm-hmm. What I think is funny with that, it's like you talk about the importance of prompts, right? And writing great prompts. And the more your prompt up front is specific and pulls data that's unique to you. So one of the things I like in Writer is I'm able to pull in things from multiple sources. So if I have an interview with the customers, if I'm going to sit down and say, write me copy for a product page, like I can just do that. And certainly a generic model can write me something if I say, here's what we do. But if I come in and my prompt includes, based on this interview, okay, things are getting interesting. And then if I back up and I have a little more robust system in place, and I could say, based on these 50 interviews with customers, and now I've got something interesting, right? It is unlikely to give me generic, I say it's sort of the average of the internet is what we're usually getting with these. But the more, that's what was not possible before, right? I mean, a human could sit and read that. You spend weeks. You do these interviews and you're going to miss stuff. You're actually going to be more biased. You're going to be more favoring your own preconceptions about what the customer wants. But when I do that, those kinds of exercises, and I start seeing the customer's language really show up in there, that is interesting to me. But that is not less work. I'm just going to go ahead and say that is not really less work. It's more like I shifted my time and it's made this possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you've done is you've invested your time in finding the expert that you want their opinion from. Mm-hmm. You've prepared questions for them. Maybe AI helped you with that side of it. And you had a thoughtful interview with them. And then you think about the prompting that you want to use to summarize the findings from that conversation. And you're right, that will save you a ton of time compared to rifling through, what could be 40, 50 pages of transcript. But again, did you really, maybe you made 30% savings in time, and it's smarter than what it would have been if you did it all by yourself, right? That's what you hope for. So mm-hmm. quality goes up. Originality goes up. But if the thought of you being able just to say, write me a blog on this topic, it's not going to be original. It's not going to be in your voice. It's not even going to get anybody to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just a quick comment on John's point of pre-production versus editorial, right? Like I completely agree with that. I call that the feedback loop. At some point, you're going to get an output and you're going to need to contribute whatever knowledge you have around that output to then feed that back into the pre-production component, so it gets smarter and smarter over time. I think that's another thing that people mislead. And I don't use this on ChatGPT. I don't know if anyone else does, but was your response better or worse? Like I just ask it again. versus actually contribute back to that feedback. And I think that's an important element in this entire process.
True. You have to train this stuff. Card, were you about to add something?
Did I give sort of some?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I just made a movement in there. I do have a question here, actually, from the audience that I think is interesting. It said, "What is the panel's point of view on transparency when publishing genAI assisted content?" I'm going to say publishing probably in that context of marketing, but I think it's transparency in using it across the board. So like while in John's example or Card's example, that's not being published, or Mike, Zach, your stuff isn't being published necessarily. Like, how are we transparent? Like, should we be transparent? I'm going to start with you, Lauren. How transparent should we be about using AI here?
I don't have any problem saying I use, AI, but nothing I publish is a finished product only of AI. So I haven't gotten to the point where I'm just literally, copy pasting and hitting send. So I think if we got to that point, I don't think I'd have a problem with it, but it's just not where we are, especially as a company. We're not there yet.
John, where do you fall on that? Do you think we should say when we use AI in it or not?
I mean, I think there's a couple of pieces of it. Yeah, I've never actually tried to produce something where it's like all just AI and thrown out. So I don't know that the day will even come that is there. But I think you do have to be very respectful of citing sources, and realize that, honestly, OpenAI is snagging a lot of content that, authors are not being compensated for. So I think it's a very fine line about how you use it. That's why I feel very strongly about the level of preparation you give it. I think that gives me the security in my mind that the majority of the thinking came out originally and from me and not from it, if you will. It just fills in the details. Also there, ChatGPT may not be great at giving sources. I think they do have some tools now for that, but Bard is better at that. So again, you could also, one other part of the process is to take something from one app to the next, right? So you could be producing in ChatGPT, but you could go over to Bard and you could throw the final work in there and have it evaluate it. And how good is this? And, could you tell me where this information came from? So, or you can go the other way around. And so that's another thing. So you can be respectful of copyrights.
Copyrights of what does copyright mean in this environment?
I know
there's a whole discussion about whether you can copyright AI. The idea that you could copyright AI generated material when it is being built on models that were inherently flaunting copyright law. What is copyright? Like, what does that even mean in this environment? So,
well, it's built. These models are built by training them on what's on the internet. So the underlying copyright infringement,
right? Like, I mean, there are copyright
infringements themselves. It's been going on for decades, hasn't it? I mean, to the point of whether you actually go and say, hey, this was assisted by generative AI. It just depends, to what Lauren said, how much it has been assisted, right? I mean, you don't say, hey, I wrote this article using 2 monitors, not 1 monitor. At some point, but I think if you're producing content that's just coming straight out of generative AI and throwing that on the web, possibly there's some other things wrong anyway. So you should probably annotate that.
That's called thinking about your life and the choices you've made. That's a much broader conversation. So Mike, Zach, I'm going to those, you're generally looking at financial data. So I think that's one of the other things, just a reminder that these are all tools. The tools that companies you are handling sensitive things like Lauren's, Starmind is heavily touching people's sensitive R&D data. John and Mike Carden are both we're talking about people's livelihoods. This is HR data, people data. Mike, Zach, you've got their financial data. In fact, you have it all. You kind of have their financial data and their HR data. But what do you think about transparency here? Where do you admit it? Where do you disclose it?
You have to disclose it up front and then make everyone aware of it. And one of the things that we constantly get asked is not necessarily when we display something, it's the traceability of how you got to that answer that people want to understand. Because that's also a missing link in AI, is that you just get the answer, you run with it and you're done. But you don't figure out how did I actually get there? And that's one of the things that we're actually producing is, yes, we can say that this number was generated by generative AI, but the trail at which to get to that is what we're creating to validate that response is accurate. So it's fact checking that information. And since for our standpoint, what was your revenues last year? What was your revenues this year? How does it compare? I mean, these are all metrics based on data that has to, garbage in, garbage out. Data has to be there and has to be accurate first. And that's something that we pride ourselves on doing.
I think that you've got like this general kind of challenge at this phase of generative AI and of the large language models, which is that they're not necessarily built to handle the data sovereignty requirements of large enterprises anyway, right? Particularly, we're mentioning GPT a bunch here, and it's obviously it's got one data center. It's in the US. So it's not particularly suitable for European applications. There's lots of things like that, and I think that like in these sorts of businesses, you're actually always making compromises between privacy, security, data sovereignty, and speed to market and performance and so on. And so, at the moment, we're much more heavily lent towards, hey, we need to be conservative from the perspective of what the enterprise expects, rather than like, hey, the fastest possible way we can do this is just, writing some GPT prompts, just because, we've got to be very conscious, not just of those things of the challenges which we understand on the surface of GPT, but the challenges underneath it related to data sovereignty and where this data is going and what information we're actually using to train someone else's model, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to show you some other questions that popped up. We've got 8 minutes left, and so drop your questions in now. This is your chance. They addressed it to you, Card, and I'm going to start with you, and then I think this is one everybody should think through. And they said, Candace says, can you give us some real examples of how you approach that mindset shift with your staff on the learning and embracing the change from the manual I use Excel to tinkering and being curious about how AI can help them and not being scared? So there's a people element of this. How do you do that as a leader, like in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as the way you create any kind of change, isn't it? You got to kind of create the coalition for change to start with. So find some people who've been experimenting with this stuff themselves and who are interested in it, and get them to come to your weekly stand up or whatever you have and say, hey, this is what I've been doing, and get other people interested in it that way. I mean, it's literally been that simple for us. It's been letting people who are kind of traditional noodlers, those sort of people who just go off and hobbyists, who kind
this
of.
This is an entire panel of people
thing.
who spent their holiday break going, "Look what I built in chat." I built this like that.
But then, let's just kind of champion that stuff and tell those stories internally. And I think it's often that simple. We overcomplicate these things with mandates and other stuff. It's just literally someone sits there going, "Hey, this is what I did." And this is this is how it's helping me. And someone goes, "Oh, hang on, maybe I could try that." And it just, you've also got to be very, very good at being willing to go, "Hey, willing to get people to tell stories that say, I did this, and by the way, the outcome was terrible." So that it's not all about like I'm some kind of genius to use this, because clearly that's not the thing, right? It's actually the other. This is democratizing AI. That's what we've actually done. The world has kind of done. It's sort of democratized AI over the last, instead of it being some arcane thing which you hire someone with a PhD to do, it's suddenly like, someone starting their marketing career is using.
Yeah. What about you, John? I mean, I know for you, this is also a change. There's some change management aspects of this, and I know that you're experimenting. But how do you get people comfortable and excited?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd go with more of on our product side and the customer side. Mm-hmm. So we're dealing with the whole global population of employees out there and that adoption level, right? And I think there's a couple principles we take. One is say it's helping you write some feedback to an employee. We treat it as it's a co-pilot, right? And so meaning as a co-pilot that the manager always has to acknowledge, accept, and submit it to the employee, right? So, and on top of that, we provide reporting as well that would say if a manager were just hitting submit. So the issue that Mike was talking about maybe, a bunch of garbage being produced or whatever, it is still like the manager will know that their contribution to this feedback is essential and that it will not look great if it says 100% written by generative AI. And so we're trying to put these various triggers in place to make sure that it's still a human driven process and human controlled, and that it is purely a co-pilot or assistant to make the process fairer, more efficient. And again, to Mike, what you were talking about, make it simpler to administer.
Lauren, what about you? What does that look like for y'all?
Yeah, same as what the guy said. It's, that change management sorry, it's screaming in the background. I think a lot of clear goals and measurable things that we propose ahead of time is really key to rolling this out. Finding a department or a team that really is desiring something and asking for some type of shift is always a really good place for us to start. I think not necessarily a trial, but just a place where we can say and showcase success to other parts of the company.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Mike Zach?
So first and foremost, I agree with everything that has been said, but I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. I'm going to play the devil's advocate now. I'm actually using this as a mechanism to kind of really understand the thoughts and mind.
Uh-oh.
Oh, did you lose me?
Oh, yeah, just a second. You're back now.
Okay. Just like, what's their curiosity? Like, ChatGPT is great to get you answers, but then you have to figure out, are those the right answers? And what's the curiosity that you have to figure out what those are? And, people that are leveraging this are more productive. If people are going to be less reluctant to use it, then I may not want them on the team in general. And it's creating this more...
He is ruthless, y'all. Mike Zach, the most ruthless member of the panel.
But what you're doing is you're creating this FOMO effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
If people traditionally like the fact if they're missing out on something, they will then teach themselves to do this, and they have to want to do this. You can't force someone to do this, and I think that that's an important lesson for people just to get a little bit more familiar with the technology that's going to revolutionize the world. That one day we're going to have all these things figured out. I figured right now we're in the wild, wild west. It came out, everyone's using it in the way that they think that it should be used. There's no governance around it. It'll all come. The government will get on board. It'll start putting these processes in place, and then it'll just be highly used and effective in the workplace.
What's interesting is that there actually are, as a governance has emerged, is like, I think HR tech is actually a good place for marketers to look. It's usually the reverse. In HR stuff, we usually look at what marketing is doing and then bring it over in the marketing sales tech. This is one where HR tech, I think, has been messing with this for a while. Think about recruiting tech. And I'm thinking about requirements to disclose that recruiting tech contains AI, right? Like the state of Illinois, the state of New York, they all require that. And some of these have been around for a while, that you're supposed to say this. Like if you're using AI in your assessments for employment, like there's been requirements in the US for years, right? And go look at the EU too. There's requirements around these things. And so I think this is coming, right? And I do think it's going to get more mature, but I guess I'm going to go kind of a last round robin here, like 30 seconds or less. Like what are we going to be talking about a year from now? But let's say we have this panel and it's a year from now and we're going, well, that's what happened or whatever. That's like, what do you think we're going to be talking about? And I'll start with you, Mike Zach. What's on the agenda next year?
Cross-functional generative AI.
Ooh.
Cross-functional meaning across departments, and you can always make a decision in one silo, but is it impacting other parts of the business? And I think that's where management needs to come in and really understand what are the impacts that these decisions are having across the entire organization.
All right. So we're going from like, I have a tool that I log into to this tool is in this tech is in all my tools to now this tool is touching everything. So you're building the singularity. Mike Zach is building the singularity, apparently. Those my sci-fi fans. Mike Harden, what are we talking about a year from now?
Look, I think we're talking about mostly the same things because the world moves much more slowly than we expect. I suspect that the biggest change is that we were in this era of just straight out experimentation, in an individualized kind of like, I'm just going to write a prompt and see what happens kind of world. And still lots of people are kind of getting on board to that. Mm-hmm. I think what we're doing now, and like John was a forerunner of this, and there's people doing this, but it's like we're now starting to build kind of more structured approach. Using our own data, building our own guardrails, understanding kind of like, how we can build our own model within the large language models that's more specific to us. And I just think that there's a sort of, that's the next logical phase that kind of happens for people. And that's probably where we'll be at in a year's time.
Okay. John, where are we?
I think we'll be talking about functional leaders like CMOs, CROs. Every single department in larger businesses will have detailed tech stack roadmaps where generative AI is embedded in virtually every process thread of the business. And if you don't have that, you're not anymore a functional leader of a department.
Oh, cool. So some people need to go fire themselves, it sounds like. So, all right, Lauren, you get the last word. Where are we in the year?
Actually, I'm going to go a step farther. I think, especially when I think about my customers and my prospects, I think we're going to see the more birth of the chief AI officer. I think they're really going to decide, okay, we've got to remove this out of either the IT area or this department trying to cover it. I think we've got to really dedicate the entire team to just focus on the inundated amount of AI tools that are coming in, the requests that are being asked, and just saying, this is how we're going to organize it for our company. So I think we're going to see more of those positions popping up when we talk about our customers.
I think we're because we're seeing some early elements of that now too, just with like governance councils. We have like people are doing like, oh, we've got this council that oversees AI, and I don't think that was a position in most companies a year ago. But I think at this point, they're in the Fortune 1000 at least. That is a pretty typical thing now. Like that's somebody you got to go through.
No one has no one had like 20 years ago a chief Excel officer though, did they? Right? Yeah,
No.
I think that there is this thing of there's this governance requirement, ethical, moral requirement that this generates. But actually, the piece of how are we going to use this and so on, I reckon, going to Mike Zack's rather more ruthless approach, it's actually going to be a case of you either do well in your job because you understand how to use genAI and that's pushing you, or you don't. And a lot of that just sort of comes down to the tool is actually easy enough for you to just grab it yourself and run with it, rather than being something that should be kind of mandated, should it?
I think it's going to depend on the organization. I think some of the cultures that have been built inside these organizations are going to really struggle. But I think that may also be what's that saying about digital transformation. It's like, well, you've either already transformed or you're dead. I think that's something Josh McNally, Ken Carter likes to say. It's like, how you're not around if you didn't digitally transform. Like you don't exist anymore. Like as a business, as a large business. So I think it might be. I do think what Lauren is describing is going to be an important intermediate step, though. I think for a lot of them, they're just stopping things. Like if you just let that happen in IT, they're just going to stop it. If you just let decisions about what tools get made by finance, no offense, Mike, they're just going to stop it. Like you're going to have to show this calculator. It's like if you just let it happen, only HR can decide. They're going to stop it. Like, because nobody actually wants to go through that level of change themselves. Like most people don't. Most people don't. Why would you do that? It's like counter. So I do think there's going to probably be this intermediate step, like what Lauren is describing. I think it's going to have to be, I think the CEO needs to be the chief AI officer. And I think so. I see how that plays out like at Betterworks. John, I would say Doug is y'all's chief AI officer.
100%. I get a recommendation from him almost every week.
Yeah. And if your CEO isn't doing that, I mean, Lauren, Mark is definitely your chief AI officer. I don't know who else might have that title, but in the end, Mark, he knows what's up. I think Cardin, whatever your title is these days, he just makes stuff up. He just changes jobs. But the same thing for you, Mike. I mean, Martin he's the most interested in this. And I think if you don't have that in your top seat right now, if I'm thinking about a young person or if I'm mid-career and I'm inside an organization, if my CEO isn't doing that, I would be looking elsewhere. I'd be looking elsewhere because I don't know that, that I don't think how you could move ahead to just trying to call it like somebody in the IT department. No offense to IT, but this is over even the CIO or CTO. So.
Yeah. And I think one last comment for me, just on generative AI and kind of the concept of it. I think what it does is it unlocks creativity, which is something that a lot of people haven't been able to do. And I go back to pitching software for most of my career. And we always talk about these, our software allows you to focus on more value-added tasks, right? And that's what I think people want to get to. And that, especially for the younger generation, coming in and copying and pasting information from Excel to Excel template, that's just not of value. And a lot of these tools now that we're creating as a society are going to get people to think more creatively, which is something that generative AI can't do at the moment. It can't think that way.
At the moment.
At the moment.
All right.
Technology is exponential.
Right. Cool. Well, thank y'all so much. We are 5 minutes over, so thank you for indulging that and kind of finishing up that thought. I am very grateful to Lauren and John and Mike for joining us today across a lot of time zones. Like we got from Switzerland to U.S. Pacific time to you're in Auckland today, Mike. I have to keep a tag on you, and then Mike Zack's he's out west. So in the US, but I really appreciate this. This was actually a really nice way to bring together a lot of conversations that we've all been having, kind of on the side. So, and now you all know each other.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
y'all. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Take care, everyone.